The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and I'm the host for the podcast, and my husband, Steve Siegel, is the producer of this podcast. Today's episode is episode number 255, I think. Sometimes my count is off. If so, I apologize. Just a reminder to please listen to this a reminder to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star rating so that Google will help more and more people find us. Also, please go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up on our videos. Again, so that Google will put us front and center so that people can find us and get the messages that we're putting out there. Our messages are of hope and that there is help available. That's pretty much always what we want to put forward. So today we have an interview that at first glance, you might have gone, really, why are they interviewing him? We're interviewing a gentleman named Andrew Zimmern. Now, if you are a big fan of the Food Channel and the Cooking Channel and the Food Network and the channels that are on TV about cooking, then you might have heard about Andrew Zimmern and wonder why we're talking today. We're not, in fact, doing a cooking class. He is an Emmy-winning and four-time James Beard award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, and teacher. Andrew Zimmern is regarded as one of the most knowledgeable personalities in the food world. He helped open and run a dozen restaurants, and at the same time, he was also an addict, spinning out of control. And after years spent living on the streets, an intervention by close friends brought him to the Hazelden Foundation in Minnesota, transforming his life around sobriety. Andrew took a job washing dishes at Minneapolis Café, Un Deux Trois. In 1992, he was named executive chef, and during his 6-year tenure turned Un Deux Trois into an award-winning national caliber restaurant. Let's talk today to Andrew Zimmern. Andrew Zimmern, thank you so much for being willing to be on the podcast today.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Is it okay if I call you Andrew, or do I need to call you chef?
No, Andrew. Andrew's fine.
Okay, because I know you're a big-time chef, so just checking. I want to make sure
we're not in a kitchen.
Okay, fair enough. I want to keep my manners in. So, Andrew, tell us where you grew up, what your life was like when you were young, and how you were introduced to drugs and or alcohol, and take us down that road.
1961, July, Mount Sinai Hospital. I came into this world, and my parents immediately took me out to our summer home. And in those days, moms and babies stayed in the hospital for a couple days. And I went to, my father picked my mother up, and we drove out to our house on Long Island. And I was, 4 or 5 days old and had my feet baptized in the salty waters of the Atlantic Ocean on or about the second week in July of 1961. I had a very, very privileged upbringing. I didn't realize it at the time. I always felt like the well-to-do family at the super rich kids school, that kind of thing. I was never wanting everything. I participated in everything. But I went to an elite private school in New York City and was at that school from, well, I tried a semester at a place called Little Red Schoolhouse, so it wasn't continuous. But essentially, from the time I was 3 years old until I graduated high school, I was at one school in New York City.
How'd you end up at the Little Red Schoolhouse? Were you just rebelling?
My mother was very progressive and wanted my father. My father was, said no, he's going to go to this school from beginning to end. And so at one point, it was actually in nursery school. I think I did first year at nursery school. At one place, went for a semester to Little Red Schoolhouse, and then hustled back to the other place. My father did not think that, in interpretive drawing, he wanted me to be taking, trigonometry as a 4-year-old. But I was, in a private school in New York City, in that environment, people were people were, they were libertines. My father once told me something very interesting. He said, he was brought up in a very strict household. And so he was going to be very liberal with his children. And he said that to me with the inference that you grew up in a very liberal environment. So you will be very strict with your children, that it flips generations. And there was something to be said for that a little bit, which I find sort of fascinating. But, my parents, I was 7, 8, 9 years old. And I remember the party where someone put a whole bunch of liquid LSD into the punch bowl. I didn't know why my dad got up on a chair and took a strawberry out of some frou-frou drink that someone had made, because they were very popular at that time. And spontaneously orated for 15 minutes what has famously been called by friends who were there at the time, actually most of whom are dead now, ode to a strawberry, but apparently it brought the house down.
Did he not know there was LSD, or was that just what was done at the party?
Most people did not know there was LSD. I could never get the straight answer out of my father. My dad was a rather conservative human being, greatest generation, fought in the Pacific, in the Navy in World War II, came back to New York, helped build a monster of an advertising agency. I mean, he was that kind of guy, larger than life, a real character. I'm a pale version of my dad. But what's amazing to me is that, at that time, nobody questioned what anybody was doing. These were successful people who were way more successful than their parents, and were really enjoying life despite the tragedies that were being played out every night on the news. At the same time, my most vivid memory of childhood is, being on the beaches with my parents and surf casting for striped bass and roasting them whole on a fire we built, or, the night the man landed on the, Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon. We were all at a famous playwright's house, and I solved my problem. Thank you. A famous playwright's house, and everyone's kids were in parents' laps staring at the moon, and they had 20 extension cords, and everyone had brought their TVs. So there were like 20 TVs with antennas. You didn't need a cable line in the late 60s. And so we were looking at the moon, while man was landing on it. There were just miraculous sort of times like that.
Yep.
And at the same time, there was the normal family tragedies going on. My parents got divorced. My father went to live with a man who would be the love of his life and his life partner, and eventually, when they got married, my stepfather. But my father's boyfriend, partner, then husband, arguably my most supportive parent, as a lot of children of divorce, in sharing with them that sometimes one of the step parents ends up being your biggest advocate. I may not be here today if it wasn't for the advocacy of my stepfather, Andre, in calming my father down and making sure that, insurance was paid for at certain times, or that, money for food, or, paying for rent for a couple months so I had a roof over my head was taken care of. But these tragedies that occurred in my life, I was non-responsive and non-emotional to, because the messages that my family of origin was not we didn't talk about those things. It was a different day and time. Anything that was bad that happened in our family, my dad did the typical greatest generation thing, which is he just sort of stood up and puffed out his chest and said, "This is the only time we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to keep marching to the top of that mountain." And that worked. I guess it worked for him to a point. Later in his life, when I had been sober for quite a number of years and was able to talk to him about that, he expressed some regret over it, but he was of the opinion he didn't have options. And I really do believe him. There are generational belief systems that no amount, I mean, today, self-help books, mental health wellness, recovery from all types of isms don't have stigma attached to them the way that they did 50, 60 years ago.
That's true.
And, my father would be around 100 today. So it's quite just short of it. Actually, he'd be 93, 94.
Okay.
But generationally, he felt he didn't really have a lot of options. That was the house that I grew up in. So
did you try that LSD by any chance, or did you?
Oh, I did. No, my first, my solution to problems was shutting down and being silent about it and stuffing all my feelings. And it came out sideways behaviorally that did not include drugs and alcohol. People who are head, ass, and overcoat into recovery understand the concept that, we are alcoholics and addicts way before we pick up the first drink or drug. We've already gone past that point of no return that you guys talk about. And I was one of those people when real family, by the way, my father would come home to what became my mother's apartment, our old family apartment. When I was 9, 10, 11, 12, he'd come home every other day after the office, see me, do his mail, because in those days you actually got mail and it took you a while to go through it. And he'd have a couple of drinks and then go down to his apartment that he shared with my stepdad or future stepdad. And he was very proud that by the time I was 9 or 10, I could mix him the perfect way he liked his scotch and soda, perfect amount of ice, perfect ratio, topped off just so. And I always took a taste of it. I loved the smell of scotch because it was the smell of my father's breath kissing me goodnight or giving me a hug. And I could always smell, his however many scotch and sodas he had. Scotch has a very unique aroma. And it sort of was, scotch reminds me of my dad. And it was the first drink. I would always take a little sip of his thing, and it never got me buzzed. I just liked the taste of it, So when I was, the point being, when real family tragedy befell us, and my mother had an accident in a hospital and was in a coma for many months, and then had to rebuild her life several years in a mental hospital before they tried an experiment at home that didn't really work. And she was never the same person after that. I had my solution. I knew what was going to take away the emotional pain that I was feeling. I did not have a voice in my head that said, you could talk about it with other people. Other people told me I could talk about it with them. It wasn't enough to sway me. Teachers, my parents' friends, other relatives all said, you can talk to us about it. It just must be horrible what you're going through. Mom in the hospital for years, dad living downtown. I learned after completing a lot of trauma work that it's okay to say that my father abandoned me to live in an apartment alone with a bunch of caregivers. That was a decision of his that he made. Took me a long time to put that into perspective. I mean, I'm 30 years sober now, and I didn't learn that until I was about 25 years clean, doing trauma workshop out at a center in Arizona. One of the group leaders said to me, "Well, your father abandoned you," and I got really said fuck you. He didn't. He's my hero. He said, "Well, he could be your hero, and you can still say he abandoned you." I mean, and I defended my dad's decision that when I came home from summer camp, age 13, and my mother was in this coma, and we had visited her, and he gave me on the walk back to the apartment that we're not going to talk about this after today's speech. I went with what he said. He was my dad. Right. I mean, that was a crucial element of this whole thing. I did what he did. I didn't believe that there was another option for me. I didn't understand that there was another option, except internally, having tried pot and tried booze And my cousins one Thanksgiving gave me a glass of ginger ale, but it was champagne, and I chugged a bunch of it. And, so I knew the effect alcohol could have. And after my father said goodbye to me that day at the house, I was off to the races. But from the trauma standpoint that I brought up before, he had left that day and said, you're going to be taken care of. There's people here in the apartment, blah, blah, blah. I'll be by every night. And he left and went home. And I never saw that as abandonment until, as a parent myself, one of these counselors at the rear retreat said to me, if circumstances were the same, would you do that with your son? And I was like, absolutely not. And the words came out of my mouth before I could even pull them back. And it was an emotional release for me that was a major part of the last third of my sobriety. That's for sure. Was, I'd done so many, fourth and fifth steps, and, my father's been on and off them for, years. And I really thought I had put all the dad stuff to bed in the attic of my life in a pretty box with a nice bow on it. And, but all that stuff comes back to you, you're never really done with it. I think I finished the last major piece. I'm sure as I age some more, bits of my father's and my relationship issues will come back to haunt me. But I think the big pieces are over. Suffice to say, when I was 13, we had a charge. This is 1974 in New York City. And, we were a well-to-do Upper East Side family. So the drugstore, I could call down and just say, we need someone hurt their ankle. Do you have, some kind, and they would just send 5 Percocet up and charge it to the house. And they would call the doctor's office and complete the circle after the pills were delivered. We had charges at the liquor store. We had, so I could call up, for the Zimmern family, we need another scotch, a vodka. Oh, okay. And they would just send it over. There was $500 in cash, which was a ton of money in those days, in an envelope underneath the silverware drawer for household emergencies. And, I knew everyone knew it was there. The people who were supposed to know it was there, the caregivers, I don't think they ever knew it was there because there was no need. We had a charge at the supermarket. You had a house charge everywhere. Like there's nothing that couldn't get done. But I knew the money was there. So my very first purchase of marijuana, I went in on a quarter pound of it with my friend about 4 days after I got back from summer camp, after I just turned 13. And like any good young business person, because I had to put the money back. We sold, 3/4 of it, and we made a little bit of money. I was able to return the original dollars, and we had an ounce of weed left over. I was like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. And the next thing I'm in 9th grade, there's girls. 10th, I'm drinking, taking pills, and smoking weed. I try cocaine, I try hallucinogenics, and I become very quickly a New York City garbage head by the time I'm in 10th grade. At the end of 10th grade, I start selling drugs. Things are, by the way, I'm also senior class president. I'm, I've got the lead in the school play. I mean, it's like I'm a popular kid. I get into girls, and my dad tells me, summer of my junior year that there's no more allowance. Got to get a job.
Okay.
And you can't live at the beach house and not work. And I'm like, okay. And I thought all my friends made a pretty stupid decision by working at the local landscape company. That was the big thing for everyone, because the landscape companies needed young, limber arms that could report for work the next day after a day of physical labor, hauling sod and manure, building berms, planting trees, doing all the stuff that landscape companies do. But that was like 5 a.m. to 3 p.m. I'm like, that sucks. I had grown up seeing the kids that were working at the landscape company literally running down the hill at the beach at 3:45, tearing off clothes to dive in the water. I wanted to be on the beach all day long, smoking joints and flirting with girls. Like, that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I wanted to work in restaurants at night, which my parents expressly forbade. You don't drive, you can't bike at night. There's no place near us. We're out by the beach. All the restaurants are back by the town. And I went and got a job in a restaurant anyway, and found some people who lived about a quarter mile away who were going to give me a lift home every night. And that quickly dissolved, because it became very easy once I was working at the restaurant. Hey, can someone give me a lift? Can you pick me up? Going home, we always partied after the restaurant closed. But I worked in a restaurant that two friends of our family owned. And so I was given a real opportunity to learn and work. And that was the summer of 1975. And I've never stopped taking a paycheck that didn't involve a restaurant since.
Wow.
My drug and alcohol problem just, got worse and worse. And the rest of my life just kept cratering. I was able to graduate from high school, get into a good college. Somehow I graduated college, mostly by going cold turkey the semesters after I was asked to take a mandatory leave of absence. I would go and I would cook in Europe. I would detox from drugs. I would just drink. I mean, I would, I had this little program of my own. I'm young. I'm in my 20s. I had a different kind of body than in terms of tolerance and what I could do. And, I could do all the things that I learned later were about managing my disease and my addiction. Mm-hmm. And I managed it well enough to graduate college, and then went right into the food business, where, because I had a lot of natural talent, I had a lot of success. I've spoken to 3 or 4 very famous chefs, legends, who fired me after a single day of work in the restaurant, because they knew what an alcoholic or an addict looked like.
I got it. Yeah.
And one very famous chef, who shall remain nameless, said to me, we joke about it a lot. I see him all the time. He came up to me after my first day and he said, look, we both know what's going to happen if you stay here. You're going to become invaluable to me. You're going to be one of the best cooks that we have here. And I'm not going to be able to let you go, but you're going to be stealing from me and you're going to be doing all this other stuff. So we're just going to have to cut it short right now. And thank you for your day.
Yep.
You can get your stipend from the bartender, and, we'll just call it quits. And it was very, very astute, because every place that I did land for a while, once I was there a week, I became the guy who was able to cook the food with the most attention to detail, but also with enough speed to keep up with the necessities of the day.
Yeah.
Historically, the restaurant world changed in the 80s in New York. Gone were small little French restaurants. Gone were all of these sort of hallmarks of the 50s and 60s that managed to stick around long enough. Some modern restaurants had opened in the late 70s and sort of ushered in a new wave of what food historians call grand cafes. And the grand cafes of the 80s in New York were incredible. And, restaurants were pumping out. It was a volume game. Let's put 140, 50 seats out. Let's serve really, really great, high quality food. It was one of the golden ages of restaurants in New York.
Interesting.
And it was ideally suited for someone with my skill set, because I may not be invaluable in a 50-seat restaurant, but in a restaurant that's 140 seats, when all those people sit down at 7:00 on a Saturday night, you need someone to work that pasta station who can put up 60, 70 plates in an hour.
Yep.
We used to joke about brunch. I hated brunch. I wound up just, snorting coke and heroin and just going into work on no sleep. I'm not proud of it. It's just how I did it. But, you needed someone to put out 200 plates of poached egg dishes in 90 minutes, 2 hours.
Yeah.
That's you do the math. It's an incredible skill set. And at the
You
same
could do
time,
it very, very well and do it very, very fast.
and I was stealing from the place, and it was the early days of the NCR 2160 machine, and it had a manager's key. And of course, I knew where the extra ones were and stole one. So I could go in and make a little deal with the bartender with the register, so that he was selling drinks that came up as a no sale on the machine, and he would just put that cash in a separate cup, and then I would give him a portion of it, and I was running a little,
Scam.
shyster operation
Yep.
in there, and going out and, I can make the fun part of it was going out to see incredible music and great after hours clubs in the late 70s and 80s, in the heyday of New York City nightlife. And that was true.
Yep.
But by the same token, I was also degrading myself. I was doing things and crossing lines I never thought that I would. I was living in inhumane conditions with people who were really scary. So, the awful part of all this is this, duality that exists for the addict or alcoholic at a certain point before they become, beyond human aid. We're at that point where we're hyper responsible, hyper irresponsible. So I was succeeding in work and making a good name for myself in the restaurant business, but I also wouldn't show up for 2 or 3 days, and I would just go on these blackout benders. And at the times that, I remember at high school parties, people would say, "Oh my God, you were so funny last night." But in the mid 80s, it was like, "Oh my God, do you remember what you did last night? You were awful." And then it turned into, "I can't be around you." And as an addict, an alcoholic, with my mindset, I went from that place where I lied. "Hey, there's nothing going on with me. I'm so sorry. Last night, I must have just been drinking on an empty stomach," to "Up yours, I don't care." And you just didn't care what happened to relationships and jobs, because the drug or the bottle became my everything. And it was the decision through which everything passed.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and give us a 5-star review. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
And I stopped being of life. And I eventually lost all my job, lost all my friends. My parents thought I was dead. I was homeless and living in an abandoned building on Sullivan Street in New York City, a very swanky address, by the way, today, but not so swanky back then. And after a year of being homeless and stealing on the streets to support myself, and really, really debasing I was rolling bums outside of rolling customers who were drunk outside of nightclubs in alleys where bums were drinking. I was one of the bums. I knew in restaurants how to go in and steal food. I knew a couple buildings, doorman buildings in New York, and how to get into the back elevator door. I was a user of people and taker of things. I stole purses off of park benches. It was horrific.
Yep.
And at one point, lying in this abandoned building that I was sharing with these guys on a bottle gang that I met the night that I got evicted. There's a sheriff of New York. He does evictions.
Mm-hmm.
This is his main job. I was evicted, and I just wanted to drink myself to death. I didn't want to live any longer. I had no desire. I felt I was a failure. And I checked into a flophouse hotel called the San Pedro that no longer exists. And paid for 4 or 5 days using money that I had gotten from some Hock jewelry that I had stolen from one of my godparents, and just tried to drink myself to death. Woke up, and I wasn't dead.
Mm.
And piecing it together, I think it was the morning of day 4. With some help of some friends, I've been able to figure out sort of how it all happened. And I did something I'd never done before in my entire life. I plugged the phone back into the wall, called one of my best friends, and asked him for help.
Wow.
And I had never done that. I thought I knew everything. I never asked a person. I never said the words "I don't know" in the first 30 years of my life.
Wow.
If you asked me how to rebuild a motorcycle, I'd say, great, let's start.
Mm-hmm.
But I would never tell you I've never done it before, or I don't know how.
I might need some help.
I was Mr. No. I knew everything, and all of my best thinking only got me into trouble, the worst kind of trouble. And there I was, calling my friend and asking for help. It was that, I woke up, I came to, I didn't really wake up. I came to, and that ace bandage of tension, that anxiety that had been around my chest my entire life just wasn't there. It just wasn't there. And it returned 10 minutes later. And I tried to talk my friend out of all the solutions that he had for me. Stole from him, drank his booze, but ultimately 2 days after I called him, walked into an intervention, and that was the late afternoon of the 28th of January, 1992. And I've been sober ever since.
Wow. So, yeah. Wow. Well done on 30 years of sobriety, because it's not easy, and well done you. Now, your whole background as like a celebrity chef, that came after you got clean and sober?
Yeah, when I was cooking in New York City, nobody, that whole thing didn't exist. Food Network didn't exist. There was Julia Child and Jacques Pepin on TV, and a handful of others. But the world wasn't, America wasn't in its romantic relationship with food at that point.
You were, but we weren't.
Yeah, that's true. So eventually I was here. I opened a restaurant. I became very successful as a chef and quasi restaurant owner here in the Twin Cities. And did a whole bunch of food things, and of course, all of a sudden, the local news stations start, hey, it's Saturday, let's ask a local chef to come down and do a food demo. Mm-hmm. And I went and I did one, and they were all shocked. And the producer came up to me after the demo was over, and they said, hey, can you come back next week? And there was something weird. And I said, please, I just have to ask, was everything okay? Just all of a sudden, you guys just all sort of bum rushed me. They're like, well, actually, we've done this every Saturday now for 6 months. And you're the first person who ever sort of spoke coherently and had a finished dish on time and backups and a swap. And, they didn't have they had 2 hot plates, right?
Yeah.
I just had an affinity for it.
Yeah.
And, so I became a regular there. Then I started being a regular on two HGTV shows that were shot here in the Twin Cities. Rebecca's Garden in the summertime and Typical Mary Ellen in the wintertime both hired me to be their in-house chef.
Okay.
Where I would do regular appearances. It was a garden show that Rebecca Coles did. So, of course, once a week, I think it was a 3-time-a-week show or something. You'd be like, okay, we pulled all the egg. Now what do we do with all this eggplant? And, the same thing on Typical Mary Ellen. And, then I sort of saw, Food Network premiered, and I sort of saw, I've always been one of my superpowers is sort of seeing things happen a couple years before they actually do. And one of the things that I saw was the door was open for talented people in the food television space.
Yep.
But I also saw those doors closing at a certain point. It's finite. You're just not going to have that much opportunity.
Right.
And so I started pitching myself to different places, and I decided I didn't want to be one of many on the Food Network. I wanted to be one of what I thought was one on the Travel Channel. I love travel and food. I wanted to take people on journeys and see the things that I had seen traveling with my parents, mostly my father, and explore culture through food.
Yep.
And so I put together this pitch, and Travel Channel went for it. And I didn't know at the same time that they were hiring a guy away from Food Network named Tony Bourdain.
Yes.
He had a show on Food Network called Chef's Journey or Cook's Journey. And the head of Travel Channel was a very smart man. He said, I'm going to put these guys on the same night and have that be a travel exploration food evening for people. And the Travel Channel, when I joined it, was Samantha Brown, and then 100 shows that were called like World's Best Bathrooms, World's Best Beaches, World's Best Vacations, and all unhosted, cheap, acquired footage shows.
Yeah.
And Tony's show wound up premiering about 9-10 months before mine. So he was shooting season 2 of what was No Reservations when I was shooting season 1 of Bizarre Foods, and they put us on the same night. And I guess you could say the rest is history.
Yeah.
Within a year, they moved me onto Tuesday. Tony kept Monday, I kept Tuesday. They put our reruns underneath us. Then they had 2 nights with big hit shows. And I never imagined, I tried for years to sell a television show. To sell one is a miracle. To have an audience like it is even more rarefied air. For it to go on for 12 years and have all its own spin-offs, Delicious Destinations, Bizarre World, all that stuff, and to make hundreds and hundreds, nearly 1,000 hours or more of television for that network over a 12-year period before they changed to become a ghost and paranormal network is the greatest honor and privilege of my lifetime. I'm still stunned just saying those words that was actually me that did that. It's crazy.
Wow. Great accomplishments and great. And I like it because I hope the people listening can see that, not only can you come back from drug and alcohol addiction, but you can make a huge success of yourself. It doesn't have to, be a death knell,
I would double down on that. Look, I celebrated my 30th anniversary in January. There is nothing that I do that doesn't get filtered through. And by the way, I'm not successful at everything. There are parts of my life that are still extreme works in progress. Recovery in some senses has come to every place in my life, but some more solidly than others, but I use the principles that I learned the first 10, 12 months that I was sober in everything that I do. I don't do it always successfully, but I have as the literature says, I have a design for living that works, and it was freely given to me. I still have a sponsor. I still go to meetings. I sponsor other people in my fellowship and the 12-step group that I regularly attend. I still hang out with, cronies. I go to men's meetings. I do all the stuff that has kept me healthy. It's my medicine. If I don't take my medicine on a regular basis, I can get sick. And I can assure people, having stuck around for as long as I have, people recover, especially in different programs, what I call 1, 2, 3. They realize, they admit they have a problem, of body, mind, and spirit, and they can't control it. And then in 2, they realize that there is a power that can help them, whether that's the group, the book, the trees, nature, whatever. There's something other than themselves. Yep. And that's the important thing, I think, in recovery is realizing that, your own best thinking got you into this horrific jam, and you better do it someone else's way. And then, 3, we accept this design for living, and we accept that there is a power greater than ourselves. And it's where that phrase higher power comes from. And it can be whatever you want. Some people call it God, some people call it the sunset, some people call it their morning dog walk, call it whatever you want, but something other than yourself needs to be in charge. And, all those years when I wasn't asking questions, when I wasn't saying the words, I don't know, was when it was me running I was the higher power.
Right.
You can't be your own higher power. Right. So you come into this thing 1, 2, 3, but I know how you leave and return to that horrific, 6th, circle of Dante's Inferno. You slide out 3, 2, 1. You lose that relationship with something bigger than yourself. You take back your own ego. You start acting on it, in 2, and then in 1, you physically pick up again. So, you come in 1, 2, 3, you slide out 3, 2, 1. Yeah. And I've just, I apply, look, Bizarre Foods. I'll give you a great, have you ever seen the program?
Maybe just bits of it. I don't think I've ever watched it all the way.
I traveled around the world, and you could say it's a show about a fat white guy that goes around the world and eats bugs.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have seen you eat bugs.
Which is fine for people who needed that piece of entertainment. But in showing people that one man's weird is another man's wonderful, in exploring cultures in as many countries as we did, broadcast in 170 some odd countries as it was and still is, it is a testament to acceptance, tolerance, and understanding of people who speak a different language, worship a different deity, love a different gender, have a different color skin, and so on and so on and so on.
And eat bizarre food.
Well, along the way, that was, I would have made, the hook could have been a hardware store for all I cared.
Yeah.
It just so happened that they went for the food thing. But I wanted to show the world that we had more in common than we had things that separated us. It seemed to be that we were increasingly defining ourselves by the things that separated us. Now, all of those principles, I did not learn in restaurants or in making the show. I learned them the first couple of years that I was getting sober.
Yep.
In the rooms that I cleaned up in, that's what they were talking about.
Interesting.
Being patient, tolerant, understanding with other people, treating everybody like the newcomer in the fellowship, thinking not of yourself, but of others, seeking to understand rather than be understood, increasing the amount of love in the world and decreasing the amount of malevolence and hate, discord.
Yeah.
These were all things, acceptance, that we talked about in recovery the first 2 years. And I just took those things and applied it to a piece of my television show because I thought,
and that's why you were successful.
Well,
in my opinion, that's why you were successful, because that's a message.
Universal truths. I mean, there were other sets of universal truths I could, but the fact of the matter is that that's how powerfully influenced by my early recovery I was, that I actually thought it would be fascinating to put some of that DNA into the show, and I do it in all the shows that I've done since.
I think that's huge. I think that's not only huge and such a great example of how successful you are, but it's also a great message that others can take away. And I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Well, thanks. You said before, some of us shine up a little brighter than others, and we get to be public people. And I know, newcomers in my groups, when they come in, really couldn't care less. The message that I always try to tell people is that, if you put one foot in front of the other and start to do what the group's conscience is for newcomers, and you use the wisdom of generations and generations of recovering people, then chances are, if you follow that advice, you too will stay clean and sober. I've never seen anyone want it and do all the work and not be sober. I've never heard someone, come back from 10 years of sobriety followed by a relapse and say, I kept going to meetings and kept doing all the work, but the booze just wound up in my mouth. Never heard it.
Yeah.
It's always people that stop taking their medicine, which for me ultimately is service. I learned, above all other things, service to other people is exactly the best way that I can practice every aspect of the program at the exact same time. And I still do a ton of service work to this day. It is the cornerstone of my life. It's the cornerstone of my recovery. It's how I run everything in my work. It is a certain percentage of everything is about service and doing the next right thing. And it's put everything on the same basis. Now, some never put into that position to do that. I was lucky and got given that platform. I'm completely blessed. I'm no different than any other, street addict, alcoholic, stealing purses off the backs of benches. I don't know why I got to, I don't question it, but, I'm grateful and humbled by it every day that I get to do what I do at a public level. However, I have hundreds of people that I know that I go to meetings with, whether they're a year sober or 30 years sober, or my friends who are 40 and 50 years sober, who would say anything other than, if you put one foot in front of the other in recovery and don't drink one day at a time, incredible, miraculous things happen with your life. The promises come true. You do get contentment. You do get the peace of mind that you never had. You do get the alcohol or drug problem relieved as if you hadn't worked for it, despite all the work you put in. Mm-hmm. It is rather miraculous. And there are so many ways to recover. My way is just my own experience,
right.
And I did it with 12-step meetings and treatment to kick it off. I know lots of friends who've done it differently. All that matters is that you don't use and you become the person that is of most usefulness to the world around you.
That's huge. That's huge, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I know you're a busy dude, you're a celebrity chef, and I appreciate you being willing to talk to us today and share your story.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it very, very much. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it. Some great messages from Andrew Zimmern, who might have, I sometimes don't know who's listening. I don't know if you're an addict. I don't know if you are friends and family of an addict, but let's face it, his life got about as bad as it can get. And he definitely broke all the rules of his moral code, but he came back from that. And in fact, he turned it all around and is now hugely successful on the Food Network. Thank you so much for listening. I always like to say, if he can do it, you can do it, your loved one can do it, but you have to reach out. You have to take that first step. And if you have a friend or a family member who's an addict, it's as important to you as it is to them to ask for help. There's help available. There are interventionists. There are mentoring websites who will help you. Just reach out. That's the first step. And I understand that it's the hardest. So thank you so much for listening. Excuse me. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll be back again next week with another interview.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.